Hello and welcome back to another Perspectives. And I wasn't sure what would fall across my radar this time. And it was a comment that I picked up when reading, coming across some work of Rudolf Steiner. And Rudolf Steiner was talking about the transition between epochs, between specifically the fifth era and the sixth era, which are long time spans. And I've talked about time cycles before. But he just said that in this transition, there will be a shift in terms of the evolution of humanity towards the ability to have more clairvoyance, which includes the ability for telepathy and more empathy, and basically an expansion of our mental and cognitive and perceptual abilities, capacities. And also Steiner made the comment that actually what's happening to according to his perspective, is that the evolution goes through great swings, and it went through a period of, let's say, collectivity or unification in the collective mindset. And then it went into a period of individuality. And we've been going through a long period or centuries, a long period in human time, of when we're trying to develop our consciousness upon an individual level. And we have to go through stages of the ego growth and growth of the personality before we can start to then go back into the collective stage. But because we've individualized ourselves and individualized the consciousness, we go back into the collective stage, retaining that individualization within the collective whole, rather than being just a kind of mass. And that got me thinking, of course, because, well, a couple of things. One, that it brings up some well-known sci-fi tropes or themes. And this idea of kind of moving towards a collectivization of the human mind, the kind of unified mind, the kind of species brain or the species consciousness is being utilized a lot in science fiction. And I think the one that came to my mind first of all is a very well-known one, which also has been serialized on television in the last few years, and it's by Arthur C. Clarke, which is Childhood's End. And it's like a novella, and it's worth reading because, without giving any spoiler alerts, it seems to be that in the process of the story's development, that there's a kind of shift towards developing a collective mind or collective species, and through the younger generations that can represent the species mind beyond the planet, i.e. at the death or the end of the planet, they have harvested, to use that also trope, that word, the collective mind of the species, as if on this planet we'd be going through evolutionary periods to cultivate a species collective mind, which then can exist off planet. And also that idea of the collective mind has been done very well by Olaf Stapledon with his First and Last Men, and his later book Star Maker. I think it's called Star Maker. The book's over there. And so Olaf Stapledon talked about that, but the collective mind in a very extensive way, going into galactic minds, then universal mind, but this idea of collectivity. And it also brought me to the attention of another book that I have on my shelf, and it's by Doris Lessing, and this is called The Making of the Representative for Planet 8, and it's this book number 4 in her quintet of the Canopus in Argos series. And I may speak about that later because it's an incredible quintet series of books, starting with Shikasta. And and these books are also standalone but continue a thread. And in this book, it's unusual because it talks about Planet 8, as they call it, going through basically a complete shift of the planet geophysically, and the planet goes basically into an ice planet. It goes so the people who are living on the planet actually start to die off because the planet starts to freeze up and goes into very extreme cold temperatures, and a representative from a more advanced species goes down to the planet to kind of to assist and to guide, or to be amongst the last few survivors as they come to the death of the species, because the species is being wiped out. But in the process, the numbers get lesser and lesser, and this is a spoiler alert, I'm afraid. As the numbers get less and lesser, actually they start to realize that they're going through a process of actually cultivating a species mind, and which represents their species mind for the planet, hence called the making of the representative for Planet 8. At the end of the book, when all the species, the last of the inhabitants have died off, they've actually left behind a collective mind that then represents that planet, or life on that planet. And that kind of ties into the idea that I think I got from Rudolf Steiner. But also, it made me think of the idea that, and this is something which I mentioned in a recent talk that I gave to the Science Medical Network on transcendence, not transhumanism, and the idea that because we're going through a transitional time right now, and we're transitioning between epochs. Each epoch has a certain features and aspects to it, not just socially, culturally, and physically, but also in terms of the consciousness and the frequency and the perceptive understanding of each era. And as we transition between eras, it's been said through certain traditions that in that transition period, energy is provided to the planet and to the species, i.e. humanity, in order to activate a latent organ or faculty that then will be necessary for the next epoch. So that's why we're going through a turbulence in terms of energy across the planet, because different energies are being recalibrated. So let's think about that. When we're going through a transitional era, certain energy is provided for those receptive individuals, and perhaps for all humanity, according to where they are, for activating organs or faculties of the human being that then can develop, that are required for the next stage of the epoch. And and if we link that with Rudolf Steiner, then those faculties could be like clairvoyance, telepathy, and empathy. But of course, what that signals basically is a heightened or an expansion of perceptive faculties. And when we heighten when we expand perceptive and cognitive faculties, then we gain access to those organs of perception, which can include mental communication, i.e. telepathy, and clairvoyance, an ability to read into the collective field. But also, I remember Steiner saying somewhere that this can also be abused, because there are certain more negative or more disruptive elements that are wishing to sabotage this development, and sometimes maybe by actually speeding up this capacity. But I mean, if you speed up artificially the capacity for, let's say, clairvoyance or telepathy, where people are not actually in a balanced or in a state to be able to utilize that, then it becomes very confusing. I mean, what would happen if we could read other people's minds, but could not control that. It actually could become a living hell. And also people would be receiving and picking up on different levels. And this would create a disharmony between different, state of society. And then that brings me to like the situation today, which links into that title of that conference, Transcendence, Not Transhumanism. It seems to look at these two sides. Now, the other trope in science fiction of the collective mind is the idea of like the Borg mind, which those people familiar with Star Trek themes will know. The Borg mind is basically the collective mind of the techno-dominating kind of colonizing culture. And it's a kind of enslavement into this techno collective mind. We're slaves to the collectives, not individualized. And that seems to represent this kind of transhumanist path, because now with all this stuff, all these developments about putting implants in the minds to communicate with our computers and pick up wavelength, you can see where it's going. It's an artificial pathway to creating a form of mind-to-mind or mind-to-machine communication, i.e. it's an artificial way of opening up this telepathy. But of course, it doesn't correspond to a person's inner evolution or inner development. It's basically a shortcut way to gain that faculty through technology. And that can become very disruptive. So on one side, it can become very disruptive because certain people have the access to that faculty and others not, which you create, different status or different, status in segments of society. And also you create confusion because people may not be, have the preparation for that faculty and to use it in the most beneficial way, but to use it for nefarious ends or to use it for an advantage over other people who don't have that access. And so that seems to me going in the path towards the Borgian mind, an artificial hijacking of the incoming unfoldment of these abilities, but not only hijacking it to the Borgian techno-transhumanist collective mind, but also that allows the people to be under the control of those who are leading the techno charge. Where of course the other path, which we can call, for sake of brevity, transcendence, is actually what Steiner and the other traditions, wisdom traditions, have alluded to, is that energy is coming into organically and naturally under the laws of evolution to activate those faculties and organs of perception to further the development and the betterment of humanity in line with evolutionary goals and evolutionary trajectories. So you see, you have the natural path and the artificial path, and perhaps we see in that playing out now in this transitional period. And this, we were kind of forewarned, or part of the preparation was to insert these tropes and ideas into science fiction, whether it's through books or through movies. So we get a sense of this collectivity or collective mind on the horizon. But we need to first understand the individualization of the human being beyond the ego. The ego is the ego is necessary, but not as a dominating factor, because then we need to bring the individualized mind into the collective beyond the ego, so we can blend, we can kind of merge in a harmonic way with an individual perceptive capacity with the collective mind. So these are just some thoughts that kind of ran into my mind as I was reading that comment from Rudolf Steiner. And I'm sure that some of you will have other ideas of, will know of other sci-fi books or stories or films that have kind of played on this trope between individual and collective mind. but it's just a speculation from me whether we see this transhumanist technocracy path coming down, and as opposed to the organic evolution of human organs and faculties being a part of this grander transitional movement between individual and collective perceptive capacities. Okay, just some thoughts there, some light thoughts on this day. As ever, in these times, it's important that we stay healthy and stay sane and stay grounded. Thanks for listening for now. Catch you next time.